The express from Beograd steams into Skopje station, scattering the crowds spread across the hot tracks. A drum beats somewhere. Head out the window, I search for Faik Abdi, the first Rom elected to the Macedonian parliament, the man whose leadership powers have been so evident at the London Congress. He will be my host in Šuto Orizari township. On the low platform we embrace like old comrades, joined again in our responsibilities, struggling amidst the crush of people come to welcome the General Secretary. Faik, a power in politics as his father had been in the family smithy, has command here. Musicians strike up, hands bear away my large portmanteau, and we're borne out of the station on a wave of enthusiasm. During the hours alone on the journey from the federal capital, I have been thinking over the short weeks since the extraordinary London gathering, days in Paris discussing with the Ruda brothers, Vanko and Lulea, the work of the newly created Secretariat. Then a long drive to Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer for the gathering there in the south of France towards the end of May. My first had been with my mother as a child in 1948, a second time while hitchhiking on the continent. The festival of Saint Sara, Kali Sara, a personal pilgrimage and holiday among the Gitans of the Camargue and gypsies from everywhere, who have heard nothing of the politics being laid down in London. Then back in Paris and setting out on a yet longer tour with the unstoppable, zealous Jarko Jovanovic, taking a break from playing the balalaika at a Paris nightclub to carry the message of the new movement through Belgium, Germany, Austria, across into Hungary and into Yugoslavia's Vojvodina province. At many a roadside restaurant, greeting musicians, distributing the first Romani pennant flags, Jarko has sat in to play with friends and strangers. He talks of his meetings with Yul Brynner, the Hollywood actor who has embraced the Romani cause. He sings with melancholy his freshly composed lyrics for Jelem Jelem, the national anthem. It has been an impromptu, exhausting and triumphant tour by the time we reach Batajnica, Jarko's dusty hometown. Batajnica, in the northeast suburbs of Beograd, far from Tikveška, where I had stayed in 1956 with Zlata Malohodzic, my first love, before those painful and disastrous months in England, culminating in separation. I thought back on the idyllic holidays in Dubrovnik, the sun and the sea. With Jarko, I entered different Yugoslavia. Zemun, the site of a former concentration camp, close to where many Roma had met their death in gas trucks sent from Berlin. In a Beograd cafe on the shady side of Marx and Engels Square, we had found Slobodan Berberski, the writer now president of the World Romani Congress. The two had reminisced about the war years. Both are escapees from roundups. Both had joined Tito's partisans. Slobodan told of a delegation that had attempted to persuade Milan Nedic, the quisling prime minister, to call off the killings. But Nedic, under the thumb of the Germans, wouldn't listen to gypsies. Over the 2 hours together, Berberski consumes a lot of black coffee and rakia. His health is poor, his nerves strained. We are driving away from Skopje station in a small Fiat car, 2 township councillors, Tevfik Mahmud and Ilya Zendel, and myself, with Faik at the wheel. Over his shoulder, Faik describes the earthquake which in the early morning of the 26th of July 1963 had destroyed much of Skopje, killing 1,000 people, injuring 4,000, leaving, he says, 200,000 homeless. Zendel takes up the story, saying how the earthquake nearly destroyed the old Romani quarter of Tofan the Mahala, which in centuries past had been the district of the gunpowder makers for the Turkish garrison. "I saw it," I shout back to him, warmed by the memory of the visit 10 years ago when with Peter Smith I had watched the girls in Tofan drawing water from the public pump. I learned that US Army engineers had helped construct the new township. Russians had sent aid too. Khrushchev himself had come to see the damage. We are passing the squat buildings and long fencing of a prison. Roma are locked up here. Up an incline and the first houses of Šuto Orizari rise into view. "Our Romani state," announces Tevfik, pointing ahead. "Only we don't say it." Red-roofed villas, the homes of better-off migrant workers away in West Germany. The remittances from guest workers in Germany, France, Belgium, I find out later, are a major source of income, alleviating the high employment. A bus is behind us full of people from the city. The driver blows his horn. Passing from the other direction are horse-drawn carts, pedal carts and small trucks powered by motorbike engines, the vehicles of the self-employed working the market and the city streets. Even before the car stops, youngsters pull at the doors. Through the windows, I see hanging from every post and window the new Romani flag. At the top right-hand corner has been stitched a red star. It signifies the partisans and the anti-fascist war of liberation. The heroes of my youth, I'm stirred to believe again in the Yugoslav brand of socialism, in the building of a commonwealth. Over coming months and years, I will be gratified and disappointed by turns. Today, everyone is out, filling the streets and open spaces, noisy and exuberant. The flags, the crowds of young and old, dressed in their best, the women and girls in many colors, make a rousing first sight of the township. In a unique fashion this summer day they are gathering to celebrate the promise of emancipation, the possibility of national liberation. Feeling the vibration, I'm convinced Šutka is the dynamo that will power the nation forward. This is my moment too. What a joy it was to be part of this colossal people's celebration, a cause here emerging triumphant. I think back to Vida Voivod and his visit to Ireland and how from the margins he had brought me into this people's movement of my leadership of the Gypsy Council in London, how the centre we had believed then to be Paris was now shifting to the Balkans by a natural, irresistible gravitation. Before I'm able to resist, I feel myself lifted shoulder high. Someone is shouting through a loud hailer. Carried through the multitude, many hands reach to grasp mine. Put down beside enormous, slowly moving circle soft dancers I'm urged to join. I decline, shaking my head. I'm no dancer. Musicians strike up a tune that would be recognized anywhere, the anthem of the European Song Contest. When Faik take me him to his home, I see the streets in the lower town are narrow, the houses poorer, water lies in the road from open drains. His is a modest, unfinished house. His wife Nejmir, bewildered by the excitement of the day, has dressed up for the occasion. Their 2 children, Baria and Isa, stand at her side, giving a shy greeting. Shown a bedroom, I've hardly opened my trunk to find a clean shirt when, with darkness descending, we're off again. A reception has been arranged at a restaurant close to the Panteleimon monastery. At the tables are gathered members of the Pralipe Brotherhood. The music is loud, the talk and laughter incessant. Several of the young women take to the floor holding hands and dancing in a line. Faik is talking while I watch. He asks what I will be my priorities while in Šutka. Many practical and political issues are raised by his question I cannot truly answer. We must, I say, work as a team, keep in touch with Berbersky, sensing already the Congress President's influence here is nil. My arrival has been an excuse for burgeoning unlicensed expectations. I bear an untested responsibility. What I can do to help bring about the fulfillment of these young people's hopes, I don't know, I cannot say. There are no instructions from the Congress now dispersed. I whisper back to Faik that we must talk tomorrow and make some decisions. As my glass is refilled, I'm thinking of that burning hot afternoon over a decade ago when I'd watched the girls fill their water pots in Topana, a place I had immediately but impossibly wanted to be part of. Now I feel I've arrived close to that destination. Perhaps she was staring because I was a stranger, but I'd caught the eye of one of the dancers. She's seated nearby. I want to ask her name. I find out that she's Sanija, Topana-born Sanija Ibrahim. Thus ends my first momentous day in Šutka. A guest at Faik's house for the next several weeks, I go with him to the Sobrani, the Macedonian parliament. Faik speaks in favor of a bill that will put a ceiling on state salaries. His amendment is the talk of the township. Yet he's thwarted from improving the lot of the poorest, the domestics who work in the homes of the elite and as leaners in the hospitals and government buildings. Nejamia complains that the politicians and their wives are not ashamed to take on ciganis, gypsy girls, at $50 a day to do their chores hired on the black. No social insurance, no benefits whatever. Those who hold the cleaning jobs consider themselves the more fortunate. We talk of the possibility of legislation that would lift the status of Roma. Faik explains the unwritten law against horizontal organization. Everything has to be top-down, vertical, democratic centralism. Politics outside the League of Communists can have no legal life. At the first sign there will be warnings, and then worse, Faik is constrained. The Pralipe depends on state approval and funding, like the cultural associations of the minority Albanians, rivals for state support. Recently, Faik Abdi has been favored by a subsidy that enabled the Pralipe dance ensemble, including Sanija Ibrahim and her elder brother Demir, to participate in a folk festival in Dijon, France. The limit has been reached. At small meetings of trusted friends, we tell each other that the approval by Beograd of the London Congress and the historic hoisting of the Romani flag must indicate Yugoslavia has entered a freer era. Yugoslavs travel abroad. Small businesses are allowed. Where exactly are the boundaries? Nobody knows. Nobody is willing to push too hard. The Turkish minority in Skopje have their own theatre. Albanians have Albanian language schools. These are future possibilities. People are asking, what's the use of being literate in Macedonian when you're going to be a guest worker in Germany? Faik wants to know, if I stay, how I'm going to sustain myself. Years before, my ambition had been to become the Balkan correspondent for a London newspaper. What I want now is modest, to continue to write for trade papers, nothing political. Will I be allowed to work? Not a chance, he says. I repeat what I've been told by Berbersky. There should be a congress in Beograd. Nobody contradicts the statement. Nobody comments. Nevertheless, I go out and seek accommodation for myself. The streets are quiet. People asleep on their stoops. In Vietnamska, a main thoroughfare, the flags hang limply. Without the crowds and the music, the township has lost its collective ardor. An old man pushing a pram approaches, offering hot burek, a cheese-filled pastry. Further up, a small crowd stands around a bus. A lad of about 14 stops me and salutes. He says he was at the restaurant with the Fralipe. His name is Gilbaz. He's on the way to buy bread. I go with him. At the bakery, a woman passes out the hot loaves. The customers are children. Strolling away, we reach open ground on which stands a large corrugated iron, the 26th of July cinema. Nearby, another serves as the municipal offices. More Quonset structures provide the classrooms for an elementary school. All are erected by the U.S. Corps of Engineers after the earthquake. We have passed an outside market and are now at the top street Garibaldi, a street of Quonset barracks. Gilbaz ducks ahead and disappears into number 14. Coming in behind, I'm introduced to his father and mother, Sanija Ibrahim and Gulfidan. Sami calls for coffee. Two girls come out from a back room. One of them is Sanija. Sami knows about the London Congress and has much respect for Faik Abdi. I tell them I was twice in Topana before the earthquake. I mentioned the public pump. Gulfidan says they have a song about it. She urges the girls to sing it, but they only laugh and disappear, embarrassed. Where is Demir? I ask, while Gulfidan reads my coffee cup. Demir has gone back to Wien, she says, swishing the grains around. Then she shakes her head, pointing, You'll return to London. Bemused and discomfited, I walk back to Faik's. He's finishing up breakfast and about to leave. He has to take me and my portmanteau to the Interior Ministry. Right now? Yes, now. Give me 5 minutes. Standing up with an armful of papers, I ask him to take charge of them. Congress documents, my typewriter. The inspection at the ministry takes a full 2 hours with questions in Macedonian and Serbia, and back again I answer frankly. The Congress wants to see Roma in Skopje gain equal status with Albanians, Turks, Macedonians. We can count on India. Mrs. Gandhi, there will possibly be a Congress in Beograd, I add. Though clearly provoking, these remarks draw no comment. On the broad desk are heaped a jumble of books, copy relating to the trade journals, which are my living, and clothes. We're keeping these for now, the senior of 3 brusque, seemingly indifferent officers says, eyes averted. What about his clothes? Faik queries. The presence of an MP has kept the meeting calm. I hide my rising humiliation and annoyance. Abdi departs for Parliament. A police van delivers me back to Šutka. Some neighbors gather as I move into a rented house in Street Pelagonia. The electricity's on. There's a standpipe outside in the yard, and the WC is an earth privy around the back. The next I hear my landlord is in trouble over making a letting without permission. The portmanteau? I never see it again. My rented house attracts visitors, curious neighbors, and the engaged, those today you would call activists. I soon have a confection of friends who initially double as guides in the ways and social norms of Šutka, greetings in Turkish and residual domestic Islamic custom. Oscar Mammoet is an art student who drops by with his sister Fanny Petrovsky from the upper street, who belongs to a minority of Orthodox Christians. Then Halim joins us, a self-taught photographer. He comes from the house of Shaban Ilyas, who lives on the other side of the neighborhood. Shaban is truly a great joker, a serious joker. We drink coffee, talk, and smoke cigarettes. Language becomes a major topic. They help me with the Arli Jambas dialect, the mixture spoken in the neighborhood. Someone pulls out a small voice recorder, and Shaban, the bravest and most cheerful among us, blends music and poetry. He is going to publish a book of poetry. One day we go to meet Shaban's mentor, Professor Shaip Yusuf, who works on Romani grammar. He is the first from Macedonia to work on Romani grammar. We go inside. The furniture is modern. Sports trophies are scattered around. Shaip works as a physical education teacher. Today, the large secondary school in Šuto Orizari is named after him. His publications laid the foundation for introducing the Romani language into the educational system, although this remains limited. Shaip shows us a red-bound handwritten copy of the grammar. He regrets having had to share authorship with a linguist from Macedonia. Yes, that was the price for receiving approval to print the Romani grammar. The publication was delayed until 1980. Both Shaban Ilyas and Oscar Mahmut played an important role in providing help. The hand-bound book is passed from hand to hand, a precious relic, an infinitely valued instrument for the creation of a literary Romani language. Shaip Yusuf has another work in progress for his eager followers, a biography of President Tito, which he translates from Serbo-Croatian. He devoted one page in the postscript to the London Congress. Apart from its content, "We are Tito's, Tito is ours," which belongs to the genre of personality cult that continued until the president's death. The book deserves a place among the foremost works of literature in the Romani language. Rare as they are, the battle for a standard language is far from resolved. On the way back to the neighborhood, I clutch the borrowed grammar from Shaip to my chest. I get on the bus. Someone places a 2-dinar coin into my hand. The money has to be passed along to the conductor, who sits at the back of the bus at something like a desk near the entrance door. The next day I see Sanija Ibrahim during rehearsals of Pralipe. They are preparing for upcoming performances across the country. Faik and his younger brother Hussein are the leaders and choreographers. Faik leads with discipline. His raised finger says it all. Faik and Nejmia spoke well of Sani. She is 19 years old, 14 years younger. She is Muslim, and I am not. I confide in my friends, asking them to intercede with Sami, Sani's father. But there is one condition. I am not allowed to take Sani out of Šuto Orizari. I set off toward Garibaldi Street. I want to take Sanija to the 26th of July cinema, but I have no clear idea whether I can simply knock on the door and invite her out. Her younger sister, Altan, appears. She jumps at the door, eager to call Sani. Between her legs, a black puppy peeks out. This is Sivi, who would later be shot by the police during the rabies epidemic in neighboring Kosovo. 15 people died. I stand in the kitchen, calmly asking whether anyone would like to go see a film. Sami has not yet returned from work. Gulfidan says that Sani and Altan can go with Gilbas. Suddenly, Gulfidan takes my face in both hands and calls me Jammutreja, son-in-law. I hug her warmly. Even though I had not touched Sanija, we had not exchanged a single word. That was it. In the end, I married Sanija, and afterward the preparations for our wedding began. In the evening, we go out and join the crowd on Vietnamska Street. Shaban and Traiko are there. Sanija and I hold hands. I feel somewhat insecure about the relationship. Now it is time for our wedding, which will last almost 4 days. On the stage where the musicians are playing, a large Romani flag is hung. A red star adorns the upper right corner. Sweets are distributed in the neighboring streets. Faik and Nejmia arrive. Sani leads the dance, dressed in a white and silver wedding chintaina, 8 meters of fabric bought in Istanbul. Lamb goulash simmers in 4 enormous cauldrons. All of Šuto Orizari is present. Every weekend, weddings and circumcisions are held, according to Sunni tradition. Many people come to the house and find me working at the typewriter. I earn money from foreign trade journals. Sanija tells stories from her childhood when she worked as a cleaner in people's houses for $5 a month, how she had to argue over the bus fare, how sometimes she managed to bring something home, food, a piece of clothing. We look at each other across a world of differences with eyes wide open. Silent questions often sealed with quiet embraces. One morning I look out the window. Sunny is washing dishes at the tap in the courtyard. At the beginning of summer, fear of rabies arrives. 15 people have died in Kosovo, the poorest province of Yugoslavia. The police shoot all stray dogs. Altan rushes in to tell us that Chivi has been shot. The months pass and summer ends. I am surprised by how cold it can be. We sit by the kerosene stove talking about our hopes, rumors from Šutka, and the latest news from abroad. Some local work comes my way. A piece for Glasnik, the journal of the Institute of National History. At home we speak Romani. Now I speak it fluently. I see Faik approaching the door, and I wonder what he will say to me. His face is dark. Sani jumps up to greet our visitor. Faik says that I must go with him again to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. In the afternoon I return angry and shaken. They stamped my passport. The Ministry of Internal Affairs has imposed a ban. I must leave Yugoslavia and not return for 2 years. Several questions were raised, avoiding the openly political. I am working illegally. I overstayed my visa. Nothing has shaken me like this before, not even the days in Bridewell in Dublin when I fled the British Army. My will is exhausted by deep disappointment. Once a faithful admirer, a partisan of Yugoslav ideals, I discovered in the neglected offices of the Ministry of Internal Affairs that they view me with hostility. They trust no one. At least not someone involved in what they see as shadowy gypsy politics. I mentioned my marriage to a Yugoslav woman. This caused laughter to spread among the officials. Where is the marriage certificate? There is no civil record. A gypsy wedding. They are condescending and vulgar. The racism was unmistakable. You took this gypsy woman just to warm your bed and wash your shirts, one accuses, provoking another round of laughter. Faik, trembling with rage, waves his finger at them. Parliament will hear about this. Faik and I leave together, silent and humiliated. In 2 days I must be out of the country. Back on Garibaldi Street, the family gathers, sitting on the floor in a dark silence. I feel guilty. I had promised that I would stay forever. Now I have to leave quickly. Arguments begin, loud and accusatory. Sanija tells her family that she has decided to leave with me. Gulfidan weeps and begs us to spend the last night there with them. Outside it is very cold. Near our street, a cat emerges from the shadows. Sani stops abruptly and looks for a stone. She throws it forward, but without harming the cat. The cat runs away. She tells me that the cat has cut across our life's path, a sign as black as death. The long Belgrade Express stands steaming, impatient to depart. I look around the half-empty station. What a discouraging contrast to the crowd, the drum and bagpipes, the warmth of my welcome here on these same tracks just a few months earlier. Now there is no fanfare. Faik Abdi does not appear. Gilbaz, Sanija's brother, hurries ahead with our suitcase, searching for seats. We enter a sleeping compartment. Sani lies on the lower berth among white sheets and pillows. With a jolt, the train begins to move. Altan and Gilbaz cover their faces, wet with tears, blowing desperate kisses and waving a final farewell. Sani, silent until now, begins to cry. Her crying is so bitter that it forces me to grasp the magnitude of this journey and the separation. We are heading toward distant London. I imagine Sanija's mother, Gulfidan, often short of breath and overweight, wiping her sorrowful cheeks. and her father, Sami, confused and in disbelief. Although I swore that I would return, they cannot fully trust me. I know this, their deepest fear has become reality. We pass Kumanovo and follow the valley of the Morava River, green and welcoming in the evening light. Sani is too distressed to eat. The smell of kofta and onions, the hamburger bought at the station, makes her nauseous. She tries to doze. I step out into the corridor and look at the cornfields. I think about my young wife's pregnancy, the poor way I carried out my mission in Shutka. I do not know where I am, nor where I am going. Few people move along the corridor, carrying luggage, searching for a place to sleep for the night. Sani calls my name through the half-closed door. She stands unsteadily, holding the enamel wash basin. Her clothes are soaked with blood. The train clatters through the darkness. I reach up and pull the emergency brake. The train begins to slow. The conductor appears with a police officer. They see the blood on my shirt. We are in the middle of nowhere. Sani continues to bleed. People gather along the track. They carry stretchers. Doctors board the carriage and I follow them to the ambulance. In a hospital in Niš, I wait beside a gurney. There are forms to fill out. A young police officer arrives and asks to see identification. I hand him Saniya's new passport. A nurse checks our health certificates. She notices that Sani has not received the rabies vaccination. Then I take out the British passport. The police officer stops at the page with the red stamp and hands it to the nurse. He turns to me. "When are you leaving? You were supposed to go today." I point toward Saniya, who is lying in pain. "We can't leave until the doctors discharge her," I reply. It is now past 2 o'clock in the morning and a long wait begins. I sit there, barely enduring it. A foreigner marked for deportation. My head is in turmoil. What for? What am I doing? General Secretary of the World Romani Congress. What foolishness, what vanity lies behind all of this? Hours pass. Morning finally lights up the hospital's high windows. Yugoslav voices echo in the corridor. After the long wait, we board a train to Belgrade and then a plane to London. For 2 hours there has been nothing but the monotony of white clouds and the hum of engines above the wing. The plane begins its descent. London is visible below. The Thames, Tower Bridge. Because of the fear of rabies, passengers arriving from Belgrade must be separated. We are taken aside into a small, brightly lit room. Immigration asks for documents. I show them the hospital discharge papers. No one can read the Cyrillic script. They say that Sani may enter on condition that she is vaccinated as soon as possible. Soon we arrive in North Kensington, in our home in London. The flat below, at 61 Blenheim Crescent, was used by Dr. Donald Kenrick, a Jewish linguist and supporter of the Congress, who is my co-author of The Destiny of Europe's Gypsies, the first full account of the Nazi genocide. He lends us blankets, furniture, dishes. We will share the bathroom, the telephone. The news is that the book will be published in English and French. I run upstairs to share this with Sanija. She is lying stretched out, asleep. Sani and I had a meeting at the Indian Embassy. When we arrived, eyes were fixed on her. She was India in an image. Without her, this first approach to the Indian government would have had zero weight. No news comes from Šuto Orizari. I hear nothing from Faik Abdi, Shaban, Oscar, Halim. Only 2 letters arrive from Garibaldi Street from Altan, Sani's sister. From the first day, Sani misses home. My wife longs for Shutka. We still do not have money for such a trip. I loved Yugoslavia and its ideals, but how could I return with that red stamp in my passport? I had to solve this problem somehow. I took my passport and poured Indian ink on it. Then I went to the passport office in Fifth Avenue, and in less than a week I received a new, clean passport. We were ready to go. In my teenage years, I had been to the Yugoslav embassy several times, located in another part of the royal borough of Kensington. I liked Yugoslavia. I convinced Sani that I would have no problem. On a warm day in 1974, we arrived in the Slovenian Alps, bathed in bright sunshine, and they looked magnificent. After 20 hours of travel via Ljubljana, Zagreb, Belgrade, and Niš, we arrived in Skopje, the capital of Macedonia, which was overwhelmed by dusty, oppressive heat. The city centre had an atmosphere of a transformed skyline, where minarets competed with residential blocks and a new shopping centre. The taxi dropped us at 14 Garibaldi Street, and I felt that things had changed in Šutka. On Vietnamska Street, Romani flags no longer hung. There were no people waiting to welcome us. Altan, Sanija's younger sister, stood in the doorway with a small baby in her arms. Gülfidan's voice could be heard from the inner room, where she lay short of breath, struggling with angina in the stifling heat. Sanija's younger brothers, Nazar and Ibce, ran in from the street to see the returnees. Sanija Ibrahim, my father-in-law, did not appear until evening. He was at work. Altan handed the baby to her sister Sani so that she could make us coffee. After we returned to the rented house, our friends got in touch to renew our acquaintances. Trajko Petrovski, who was preparing to marry a woman from Belgrade, would, after graduating, take up a position at the Folklore Institute in Skopje. The artist Oskar Mamut worked on the editorial staff of Romano Sumnal, Romani World. His sister Fatima, Fani, now lives in New York. Zekir Dizoran, another poet, also moved to Italy. In the summer of 1974, Šutka was visited by Rishi, a future diplomat and participant in the first Romani Congress in London, as well as one of the creators of the Romani flag with the wheel. His visit reignited national pride within the Romani community of Šutka. Rishi promised to establish a Romani Institute in India and to turn Chandigarh, his home in Punjab, into a center of Romani culture. He also announced that upon returning to New Delhi, he would speak with Indira Gandhi, confident he could gain her support for the Romani cause. Public excitement in Šutka arose when Rishi made a public appearance at a wedding. Spotted on a balcony above the wedding crowd of dancers and passers-by, the band stopped playing and all eyes turned upward. Accompanied by Abdi Faik and several other respected guests, Rishi raised his hand as the crowd awaited a speech. "Amaro Rat, our blood," he called out, followed by prolonged applause. The band then began to play the national anthem. Although pleased by the response, Rishi later expressed disappointment. Faik had refused to travel with him to Niš to meet Said Balik. A few days later, Faik informed me that my presence in his municipality was complicating his political position. He pointed to the growing nationalist agitation, particularly linked to Croatian émigré groups. Faik believed that the Belgrade Congress had been reduced to a mere discussion due to fears of nationalism, and that initiatives had been deliberately obstructed. Nevertheless, he expressed hope that the Romani movement would develop more strongly outside Yugoslavia. We agreed that a second Congress should be held as soon as possible, if not in Belgrade, then elsewhere. In order for me to stay longer, Faik suggested that I translate our marriage certificate into Macedonian and apply for permanent residency. Sanija's face lit up when she heard this. Faik Abdi lived just a few doors away, although we spoke only occasionally. His house was still unfinished, but he was a man of the people, gifted with authority and intelligence. He was widely respected and trusted in Šutka. Faik had been politically active during the period of Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia and remained so after its dissolution. The party he founded, the Party for the Full Emancipation of the Roma, still exists today, although with reduced political influence. I considered Faik to be the most capable person to lead the Congress, but his role was obstructed, a fact that had to be acknowledged. Attempts to establish a parallel political structure within a communist state, even in non-aligned Yugoslavia, proved to be impossible. Every 3 months I traveled by train to Gevgelaya, the border town with Greece, which at the time was still under a military junta. By crossing into Idomeni, I obtained a fresh passport stamp, which kept my stay in Šuto Orizari legal. Nevertheless, I waited daily for a call from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The mere postponement of the decision fueled speculation. That morning, I was in contact with Faik Abdi, united by shared frustration and uncertainty as we waited to see what would happen. After my return from England, a tangible threat to our personal freedoms emerged. Although I never spoke publicly about it, I believe that the main source of opposition to the movement in Yugoslavia stemmed from a report submitted by Slobodan Berberski and Faik Abdi immediately after the London Congress. The document presented directly before the League of Communists of Yugoslavia stated that the Roma aspired one day to have their own state. At that point, Faik faced the possibility of arrest, while I stood before a second deportation, this time permanent. Faik came to the house. We sat on chairs at the table in the living room. On the table was his black parliamentary briefcase, with documents laid out beside it. To them I added a translation of our British marriage certificate. This surprised him. I had completed the task after finding a lawyer in the city. Faik read the certified copy, and we set a date to present my case at the ministry. I reiterated my intention to apply for permanent residence, and noted that, should the political climate improve, I might also seek citizenship of Yugoslavia. Regarding my situation, Faik warned that accusations of espionage were used freely. I was treated as a foreign agent under surveillance, with authorities waiting for any action that could be used against Faik Abdi. The conversation continued under a shadow of fear and political constraint. Faik pointed to the growing marginalization of the Roma, intensified after increased autonomy was granted to Skopje. He produced a copy of the new constitution, which listed Macedonians, Albanians, and Turks as constituent peoples, with no mention of the Roma. Faik believed that the best option was to organize a congress somewhere else in the Balkans. Half a dozen capital cities could be named as potential locations. If not within the communist sphere, then Istanbul or Athens. It would be a congress that would light a beacon for Roma everywhere. At this, the two of us embraced, and I left convinced of his steadfastness and his wise counsel. Night was falling as I sat at my desk typing when Sanija called out from the kitchen. A police officer was standing outside speaking into a walkie-talkie. We watched him briefly before he knocked on the door. Sanija translated what she overheard. The officer was asking his superior whether to bring in the Englishman immediately or wait until morning. Instead, a message was delivered requesting that I report to the Ministry of Internal Affairs the following day. The tone of the visit made it clear that a crisis point had been reached. There was no chance that my residence application would succeed. Only a narrow possibility of escape remained, a train to Thessaloniki. I packed nothing. I only divided the money with Sanija and told her to follow the next day. Then Gilbaz appeared. Sami, my father-in-law, called for us to come to their place. We hurried in silence toward the shacks. Altan stood in the inner doorway holding Mine, who was about 18 months old at the time. Natasha, 3 years old, peeked out from behind her legs. Sanija sadly told me at once that we had to leave. I did not know it had been planned, but now a general alarm had been raised. Jamutreya, my mother-in-law cried, you cannot leave us. Not a second time, please. To reassure everyone, I said that I had to leave temporarily for Thessaloniki, only for a short time. I spoke about my conversation with Faik and my plan to present my case to the ministry upon my return. I could not conceal the police visit. Shukar, Sami replied calmly when I said that Sanija could stay with them, inviting us to sit by the cushions along the sofa. Altan stepped forward and placed the baby, Minet, into Sanija's lap. Then Sami, looking directly at me, asked whether I was ready to become the child's godfather and lifelong guardian. I nodded. Sani passed the trembling infant into my arms, warm, trusting, a living weight. Then Sami takes the scissors and with grandfatherly gravity cuts a lock of hair from Mine's small head. Golfidan presses a few hairs into a piece of dough. You must eat this, she tells me. I free one hand to accept the bite. Holding Mine tightly, I move the dough into my mouth. After a few swallows, a small part of her passes into me. The ceremony ends. Bound in new, unlimited ways to the Ibrahim family, I feel comforted to be so united in this sad hour before my forced departure. Late that night I arrived in Thessaloniki, and after finding a small hotel, I took a midnight walk along the Paralia. The sea lay in darkness. The few carts passing in company increased my loneliness. That new responsibility as Coom traveled with me. All those newly tied by it were probably now sleeping in Shutka. The absence of the warmth and weight of the little baby, replaced by the cold of the seafront, sustained this isolation. The following day, to my relief, Sanija was waiting for me, as agreed, outside the railway station in Thessaloniki, sitting on a bundle with our suitcase beside her. When she stood up, I noticed she was wearing boots and a skirt. She never wore shalvari again. My parents-in-law had clearly accepted this as part of the period we would be living in Greece. That morning I secured a room in Kule Cafe in the old part of the city. I set up my typewriter and over the following days wrote letters to every activist whose address I had. At a copy shop I produced 500 circular copies announcing that the next World Romani Congress was in the planning stage. In the newly discovered freedom Greece offered, my heart and mind lifted. I was determined to fulfill my promise to Faik, to myself and to others. I was on fire. I had to return once again to Yugoslavia. Our British passports were stamped at the Greek border. There were no questions on the train. We returned to Shutka. The electricity supply was unreliable. Sami, my father-in-law, had installed a tin stove, but fuel was scarce and expensive. With donkeys and horses, Albanian woodcutters from distant mountain forests brought firewood. When I asked about Faik Abdi that morning, I was told he was no longer a member of parliament and that his passport had been confiscated. It was said he might have fled to Belgium, where he had relatives. For the Roma, Macedonia had entered a period of economic and political decline. My neighbors believed my case was no longer a priority. The police were not looking for me. If I left quickly, trouble could be avoided. Our luggage stood unopened by the door. There were tears as everyone recalled the fateful journey 4 years earlier. I told them we would be in Niš, easier to reach than Thessaloniki, as we exchanged final emotional embraces and kisses. During these months in southern Serbia, I worked largely on my own, though local cooperation proved effective. Sait Balic remained throughout his life a friend, comrade, and trusted ally, as did his son Osman, Boban. The situation differed from Šutka. No Romani flags were visible. Of Belgrade I knew little, except that Jarko had distributed flags across Vojvodina immediately after the Congress. If a compromise existed in Serbia, it was never mentioned to me. Optimism marked the meeting of the Congress Presidium held in Niš in late March. Shaip Jusuf, who had arrived from Skopje, reported that he had been in the federal capital and assured those present that the authorities supported holding the Congress in Belgrade. According to him, one of the city's largest halls, fully equipped for interpretation, would be made available. I applauded, not doubting the report's sincerity, but its realization. The plan conflicted with Faik Abdi's assessment, which I stated openly. Nevertheless, a working committee was established and the opening date was set for April 7, 1980. Meanwhile, on May 6, 1978, the second session of the Presidium was held in Šuto Orizari. A quorum was present, consisting of Sait Balic, Shaip Jusuf, V.R. Rishi, and the two secretaries. The president was absent. Jan Tibula, living in self-imposed exile in Switzerland, did not attend, fearing arrest and forced return to Czechoslovakia. Guests included Einard Giles from France, Rahim Abdullah, Žive Salijević, Mehmet Halim, and Ismail Serafin, known as Shero, who later settled in Düsseldorf and became associated with the Islamic revival. In Šuto Orizari, many people had returned from abroad to mark Đurđevdan Ederlezi, leaving the municipality overcrowded and under police surveillance. No one knew how the authorities would react to the semi-secret meeting held in the home of Shaban Ilyas. Since my arrest 7 years earlier, the situation had become even more dangerous, especially for Faik Abdi, who kept his distance for our protection. A lookout was posted at the window. The first item on the agenda was an initiative to seek a meeting with the West German government in Bonn regarding the issue of war reparation.
The Second World Romani Congress was held in Geneva in 1978, 7 years after the First World Romani Congress. Although there were strong efforts to organize the Congress in the Balkans, in Belgrade, Athens, or Istanbul, these initiatives were not realized. Nevertheless, Grattan Paxson, together with a group of prominent Romani activists, Sait Balic, Shaip Jusuf, V.R. Rishi, Einard Giles, Rahim Abdullah, Žive Salijević, Mehmet Halim, and Ismail Serafini, played a key role in organizing the Second World Romani Congress in Geneva in 1978.